Hello, dear viewer. You may venture on this journey with me as a non-Emily Henry reader or an Emily Henry reader. You might have a crush or partner who reads these and want to know why they're popular, or maybe you've read them and would like different opinions on them repeated to you for some reason. Regardless of who you are, you're going to, from now on, listen to a very in-depth discussion of every one of her books and characters. And my opinions will show up every now and then too, so yeah, I hope you're prepared for what you've signed up for here. We're going all in. No bars held back today. Quick note, the only one I didn't read was Hello Girls because that was in collaboration with another author. And also it was $34 on Amazon. I swear, if I found a cheaper alternative, I would have read it. That's not the world we're living in. Anyway, I wish I had more to say, but I don't. Actually, one more thing. If anyone who's working for Emily Henry watches this video, can you fix the image for her website for Funny Story? It's not in HD and it was really bothering me. It looks like a screenshot. I know this is rich coming from me as someone who almost never gets HD reference media, but this is a published author's website and she deserves way more respect and consideration than I do. Maybe it's fixed by the time I release this video and this will end up being pointless, but whatever. Anyway, let's begin. Part 1. I don't know if we're doing parts or not. I'll figure it out later. The formula. I don't know if this is something Henry herself has developed or if it's something that's just manifested the more books she's written, but there is a formula to her novels, I found. We're going real scientific today. The formula isn't always followed to perfection. The timeline of these events can be stretched or happen non-sequentially, but you can find it adheres pretty effectively throughout. There are exceptions, which I will call out, don't worry. So let me explain it to you. Step 1. Our female lead is stuck in a terrible situation. This really varies from novel to novel, but the most important thing is that in step 1, she is unhappy. Step 2. Our female lead and male lead will now make out. This usually happens about a quarter or fifth way into the novel. Our main two characters have met at this point, and with them, whatever dynamic their relationship has, whether it be enemies, rivals, acquaintances, or friends. For some reason, they will kiss and its description will last at least a page. This kiss is very important because the female lead will be horny about it and not shut up about it until the next step. Step 2. This is the step where the novel ramps up and the female lead is running around in circles, distancing herself from even the notion that the male lead is interested in her, despite enjoying his company more than she would a friend. And why would he be? He is an Adonis, the greatest man to ever live, even. We will be fed good guy propaganda for most of this part of the novel. Also to note, they will not talk about the kiss again, or will give some bland explanation about how it was a bad idea, which most of the time it really isn't. This is usually where the relationship develops in a realistic way, like they spend time together, enjoy each other's company, get a bit more physical, etc. This part of the novel is usually the most fun part, and is the main draw of romances in general. Step 4. This is the step where they sleep together, and it will be at least 2 to 3 times longer than step 2. Personal taste thing, I usually skip these scenes. They just became very intensely sappy sometimes, just not my thing. Step 5. During this step, the male lead will just disappear from the female lead's world. Right after they sleep together, everything seems perfect, and it feels like the book could just end there. But all the conflicts that were set up in the introduction barrel in out of nowhere. Like, maybe there's a secret that's revealed, usually to do with a side character, so the male lead is just suddenly written out of the story to leave the female lead at her lowest moment. After being one of the most important people in her life, he just kind of disappears and returns with an explanation. We'll rank how good these are because they really vary in quality. Step 6. This is where both characters hash it out and fully confess their love for each other. They're finally happy and together, all the conflicts are gone, and we will never see these characters again. There also will likely be some extended monologue about the greatness of love and human connection before the book ends. Now, you might have heard all that and been like, so every book is like this? How is it interesting to read that 5 times? And to you, I would say, kind of, yes. Especially when you're anal enough to be able to write down a formula for them after only reading 2 of her books. Though, like I said, the timeline is different for a lot of these books, and even if they do follow the same beats, they do vary quite a bit, considering the characters are very different, and so are the environments they inhabit. As similar as they are in structure, they differ in almost everything else. In a sense, they're like those detective shows that you drop halfway through because you recognize the pattern, and they get really boring and formulaic after a while. But I think the appeal of these books isn't the formula, they're the premises. They're very strong, and it's fun to see them develop over the course of the book. Henry will start off with a very simple hook and then flesh it out really well. Once you're hooked on a premise or get used to the characters, their banter kind of just sucks you in. Alright, I'm gonna be going through each novel now, and thought it would be fun if I went from the book I least enjoyed to the one I most enjoyed in order to build some suspense. So now you'll be sitting at the edge of your seat, waiting for what could be on my number 1, because clearly my opinion matters to you a lot. I didn't like this one just on any level, really. It was the last book I read because I had the ones with more interesting premises higher on my priority list, so I admit I might have been a little burnt out by having read so much Emily Henry at that point. Maybe if I read it again in a year or something, I'd bump it up, but for now I still think this is the worst one. Essentially, this book is, if you want to use book talk romance tropes, best friends to lovers, which I personally really like. I think there's something really cute about watching two people who know each other really well decide to take the next step, or like ghost each other for 2 years before taking the first step. Our female lead is Poppy, who is a travel blogger writer who, for the last 12 years, has had this endearing, close relationship with our male lead Alex since college. And every year they take a summer trip where they vacation together for a week. So no matter how far they move away from each other, or who they date, or how busy their jobs get, they always have time for their annual summer trip. However, on their most recent trip to Croatia, some vague argument happened that led to both of them not interacting for 2 years. And so Poppy, having really missed him in those 2 years, decides to rekindle their friendship again with another summer trip. Except this time, it's on a pretty low budget because she's low on funds. It's very middle of the road for me, this premise, and I don't know why. Maybe it's because there's no drama, and I love my drama. At most, I was curious about this moment they had in Croatia that led them to distancing themselves from each other, but I guess that it would take a long time before they addressed it in the book, and I was right. So the first 2/3 of the novel kind of ended up being a chore to get through as a result. That's not to say that all the romance stuff was terrible, but to be honest, I was having the most fun when they were just best friends going on this holidays. It's just the ending felt so jarring because it's such a slow burn at the beginning, and then by chapter 31, suddenly they're dating with not too many reservations, and it's like, couldn't they have been like this earlier? I guess you could say that about every romance, though. I think Alex is probably the second weakest male lead for me. He's very like Eddie from Abbott Elementary. They're surprisingly similar characters. But I would say Alex is infinitely less interesting. I was excited for what his trauma-ridden backstory would be because all the male leads in Henry novels have some intense trauma-ridden backstory that they vomit out to the female lead towards the climax. And when I learned it was a religious trauma, I got so excited because I have religious trauma. I thought he would be my favorite male lead. Finding someone who has religious trauma is the equivalent of finding someone who likes the same genre of music for me. It's such a welcome feeling. We share in the intense pain and suffering of never seeing the light of heaven. But it didn't seem like there was any point in the story where this was properly explored, so that was a dead end. He just ended up having daddy issues, which is so commonplace in romance that I physically roll my eyes whenever I see it, even when it's done well. Alex was just very forgettable to me, like literature-obsessed Ken doll. Compared to the other male leads, he's like a half-baked cookie. I'll give him a 6.5 out of 10, I think. I'm ranking the male leads, by the way. I think I forgot to mention that. I like that at least he had different color hair. So many romance male leads have black hair. It's such a consistent thing. I wonder if blondes will ever come back into fashion. Right now, they're definitely not popular from what I've seen. Alright, so the formula. Step 1. So Poppy isn't in a very bad place at the beginning at all, and to be honest, I think she has the best situation out of all of our leads. She has her dream job, dream apartment, a great social life, and the only thing she doesn't have is her best friend. And also, she might be hating her job as well. I think Poppy is a very fun character. She's hyper, very extroverted person. It's just that when her main sad thing is that her life is so perfect that she kind of hates it, it's just not a lot to chew on from the beginning. A literal suffering from success situation. But I think exploring burnout was pretty interesting. Step Dukes. The kiss happened so late that I was worried that this book would throw my entire formula out of whack and I'd have to make this the one exception to it. It happens right before the scene where they sleep together towards the third act of the novel, but I don't really count it. I think they're separate events. The kiss scene, according to my formula, would be the flashback to when they both made out in Croatia for the first time. I'm bending it a little because this is described after they have slept together for the first time, but I still think in linear terms it makes sense since this whole novel is the current summer trip interspersed with events from previous summer trips. I'm counting it. Am I trying desperately to make this formula work, even though this breaks it? Maybe. I'm not cutting the paragraph where I detail the formula no matter what you tell me. I'm proud of it. Step 2. The will they won't they part of this novel was probably one of the most miserable experiences I've ever had with a romance. Typically, for me, this is the heart of Henry novels because it's the push-pull that most readers gravitate towards in seeing their couple pre-relationship. But like, the whole idea of Poppy trying to make the perfect summer trip to become friends with Alex on a shoestring budget means everything just constantly goes wrong. Let me give you a list of things that happen. A. The thermostat wasn't working at their Airbnb until the very end of their stay. B. It's really hot. So hot, in fact, that you will start sweating as the reader because because of how often they mention it. C. There's one bed, but they don't share it. One of them uses the worst pull-out couch bed, which is clearly not fit for either 30-year-old. D. The bathroom is apparently for group baths or something. I know this probably doesn't count as a bad thing, but the characters make fun of it and hate it, so it is framed as a bad thing by the novel. E. Alex gets a back spasm at night and spends an entire day just resting in bed at the apartment while Poppy has the most depressing trip to the art museum I've ever listened to. F. Every single event they go to that Poppy had planned is closed. Every attraction, every fun activity, everything either ends early or is closed. Legitimately every single one, also because it's hot. G. Alex also gets a headache on the same day they plan the activities and isn't able to join in as easily. H. They drive back to the apartment, but then the car gets a flat tire and there's no spare in the trunk either. I. They get an Uber home, but Maps isn't working and there's a lot of traffic. I know that things get a lot better after this, but that's after they get into a relationship, so it's just kind of tiring. I get that things going wrong was meant to be symbolic of their failing friendship and their inevitable romance, but it's just ended up seeming like a cause and effect situation where their now broken friendship is the result of the trip and not the result of their feelings for each other. I think having the trip go exactly as Poppy wanted, but their dynamic being bizarrely fractured, despite that would have shown how they were trying to keep up this farce of a friendship when they're both in love with each other. I said I like drama, but Poppy gets so stressed during this trip because of all these environmental things outside of her control, and I just felt bad for her. It's not fun or engaging drama with connection to the male lead. The will they won't they part I did like, however, was all their previous summer trips. The only one I didn't like was the Croatia trip because of the guy that was also there for some reason who they hated. I don't know why he was there. He was annoying. I don't know. I don't even remember his name, man. Step Quattro. They do it and it's very random and sudden and jarring. I don't think it was as slowly developed as it should have been, to be honest. Step Sync. So, why does Alex leave? I think the explanation for why Alex leaves in this one is pretty reasonable, but also very cliche. Basically, Poppy had them go on this trip because she wanted to kind of take a break from her job since she was getting professionally burnt out. And when she explained this to Alex after they start dating and it's towards the end of the trip, he's like really hurt by this because he sees it as her taking him home as like a souvenir, like they weren't anything serious. He was looking for a serious relationship because he really wants to get married or something. That's like the big thing with Alex. He wants to get married really early. I forgot why. And after saying all this, he just leaves. So yeah, I don't know. It's fine. It makes sense. It's one of those things where if you take a moment longer to properly listen to your partner, you might change your mind and be able to recognize their genuinity. But if you don't, I guess ghosting them for 2 months is a lot easier even though you're in love with them. Step 6. Eventually they make up, and the way they make up is very bizarre. It's just set up really weirdly. Important note is that Poppy hates the high school that Alex teaches at because she went to school there and was severely bullied as a kid. And so whenever Alex suggests she visits him at work, she always says no because she has a huge trauma about it. So in the finale, she decides to bravely fight her trauma and do a romantic confessional speech there. But when she gets there, it turns out he went to a bar instead. I guess during school hours or just after school hours. Feels really out of character for Alex to get drinks that early or to get drinks at all. He was just never established as a guy who went to bars outside of Poppy. Anyway, Poppy tells him how much she loves him, he rejects her, and then she's running out crying, he chases after her, and they work it out, and that's where the book ends. Thematically, this book just wasn't very cohesive. The character arcs were all over the place. Like, I felt bad for Poppy having gone through professional burnout, and I was glad she was able to get out of it. But the solution was apparently therapy and recognizing that she was being too reliant on Alex and other people for her happiness. I don't think she needed therapy to realize she hated her job. I thought that was weird. People do have revelations in therapy, I guess, but when you're reading a story, I think it's just lame to have some unrelated character fly in the last hour and give the protagonist an epiphany. Alex is also very detached from the story. Maybe it's just because that's his personality, but I never felt like I understood him more as the story went along. He was so stoic from beginning to end that when he suddenly spouting how much he loves Poppy, it's so sudden. I don't know. He was kind of there, I guess. Henry doesn't really objectify male leads as much as other romance novels I've seen do. They don't always feel like perfect fantasies. They feel real and human. But Alex kind of does feel objectified, and it was just weird to read in a Henry novel. One of the things that had me hooked through the whole book was the mystery over why they stopped taking these trips. I was convinced that the reveal would make sense. Like, I was making theories about it in my head, but in the end it really didn't. This Essentially, after being best friends for 10 years, they make out while drunk one night as single people, and it's like, alright, but surely something happened afterwards, right? That can't be it, surely. But no, Poppy acts like it was an accident, and Alex says it's okay, and then they just stop talking for 2 years. Alex ghosted her and they just grew apart afterward. And his explanation is that he was giving her space, but can you just do that? Can you just give someone space for 2 years? Is that a thing people can just do? Especially someone they have such a close enough relationship with to go on annual holiday trips. Am I insane? Also, I wrote 2 notes for this book while I was reading it. I'm quite bad at taking notes for anything I review. I kind of just purge everything on a Google Doc about a week after I'm done, or the second after I'm done. And my first note is there's a Mike Wazowski reference. This was from the beginning of the book, since there's only one. If you're a Mike Wazowski fan, you might be disappointed. Unfortunately, he has very little plot relevance. My second note is he's a question mark over me. So, to explain, this is a sentence from the book. I couldn't stop laughing at this line, and I don't know why. Henry uses a lot of similes and metaphors in her writing, and most of the time, they're pretty suited for the scene, but I just couldn't continue reading when I heard he's a question mark over me. I read that to mean that's how he was positioned while he was hugging Poppy, who's a lot smaller, but like, I think any other word would have fit that sentence. Maybe he's a lamp over me, or like, he's a pillar over me, or even, he's a blanket over me. Actually, all of those sound bad. Maybe she should have just cut that sentence structure from the final draft. It's like, I can picture it, but also I'm thinking of the shape of the question mark as this giant curve and planting my interpretation of Alex on it, and it just looks like Megamind. It looks so stupid in my head. Is a question mark over me. Book Lovers seems like the novel most people recommend with Emily Henry, or it's usually the one that hits the right spot for people. It's not too sappy, it's funny, it's bittersweet and distinct. I think I wasn't that into this book because I just wasn't a fan of the main characters. It's just a personal preference thing though. For a lot of people, I'm assuming what they loved were the characters. The premise of this one is that a competitive literary agent, Nora Stevens, and her editor, Charlie Lastra, have a strong rivalry. They both try to find the next big novel that she can agent literally and Charlie can edit. By coincidence, they go on vacation to a small town and start continually bumping into each other before falling in love. This is not my favorite premise, that's why it was so low in my priority list. I think I don't know. This is a rivalry that didn't make much sense to me, and even before they start flirting, they're quite friendly. It's like enemies to lovers in light, where they don't really hate each other that much. They even team up pretty early in the book, and it's not a reluctant team up. They're both pretty down for it. I was enjoying the second half of this book way more than the first half, though, that's for sure. Usually in Emily Henry books, I mainly like the first part and lose interest by the second, but in this one, my enjoyment was pretty stable throughout. It's one of the more cohesive and consistent ones. Charlie Lastra is also my least favorite guy. He's just not very fun. Which is funny because I think Gus from Beach Read is actually a lot less fun than Charlie, but that might be because January works as a better foil to Gus than Nora is to Charlie. January makes fun of Gus's broodiness, while in this novel, it's something Nora accepts and is attracted to. And I think that's boring, but again, that's a personal taste thing. Even though Alex was a lot less developed as a character, I still preferred him over Charlie. Charlie's just very stoic, like full on. He's all business. I'm sure a lot of people like this kind of character. I think they're just not for me. Maybe I'm just very uninterested in stoicism unless it's a woman. I don't know. My favorite description of Charlie is from Nora when she says that if a jungle cat somehow became a human, it would be Charlie Lastra, which is probably the weirdest way you could ever describe someone. She constantly says it. I don't think she only says it once. Every time I had to contort my imagination trying to imagine a guy who looks like a cat without a furry costume. So I'm giving Charlie a 6 out of 10. Whenever he showed up, I wasn't exactly jumping for joy. It was like, oh, this guy's back? Which is probably not the best reaction to have for the male lead in a romance novel. Nora was a good foil for him, but I didn't like her very much at the beginning either. But this is actually intentional on the part of Henry. This book is essentially a deconstruction of Hallmark romances and cliches. Nora, from the very beginning, has a phone call with her boyfriend about how he's leaving for this small-town girl he met a week ago and had fallen in love with, and trying to save some failing business, and she's dumped as his evil girlfriend from New York. It's very self-aware of the tropes it's parodying. It's making the no-nonsense businesswoman from New York the main character, but doesn't villainize her. Nora, as a result, is a hardworking woman who is kind of calloused over. If people want her to be the bitchy, too hardworking woman, she'll be that as long as she gets stuff done. She's seen as nagging and aggressive when she just cares about her job a lot and loves her family. It's a nice character arc, predictable but not boring. I liked seeing her confront her own vulnerabilities and her fear of other people's perceptions of her, especially her sisters. Her and her sister then go on this spontaneous vacation to a place called Sunshine Falls where they have this bucket list of cliche Hallmark tropes they need to fulfill, like saving a failing business, going skinny dipping, doing camping, dates, etc. And Nora just joins along without much interest, but she eventually starts having fun with Charlie, who's also from New York and is immune to the charms of small towns. I thought it deconstructed these stories really well because I think a worse author would have had Nora suddenly come around to how great small towns are and decide to stay there, but she returns to New York instead because she likes being a working woman and she loves the city, and there's nothing wrong with that. Hallmark movies have this strange, feverish obsession that everyone who enjoys working is actually compensating for their insecurities as a person or is greedy, and that settling down is what everyone should do, but that's pretty unrealistic. I like that this book calls it out, it's refreshing. So, the formula. Step 1. Nora is not in a particularly miserable situation in this one. I think she's on the better end than most of our female leads. She has a great job, a great family thanks to her sister. Her only gripe is that her dating life has been pretty bad. Step Dukes. The couple's first kiss is actually after the second time they meet. They play some pool and they make out at her doorstep. Very American, very cute. I just don't understand Charlie's reaction because after the kiss he pushes her away like, no, I shall not sully you. Like, he's in a period drama. I don't remember what the explanation was for him pulling away, but it was probably like their work colleagues and he doesn't want to mess up their professional relationship, which is funny considering she was sending him werewolf erotica during their professional relationship. Step towards. The will they won't they part of this novel was pretty fun. Since Nora and her sister are checking through the list, she and Charlie tend to meet up a lot by accident in town. Also, he ends up helping her edit for one of her clients, which was sweet. Step quarter. This happens a lot later in the timeline, I think. And honestly, I don't remember where, which is crazy because I just finished reading this. I think it was during camping or at a desk or something. Maybe they didn't sleep together. Does this break my formula? Step sync. So Charlie leaves. Charlie doesn't actually leave. Ironically, the problem is that he stays while Nora returns to New York because she's starting a new job. He has to stay to take care of his family who lives in Sunshine Falls and can't go back with Nora to New York. It's probably the best explanation for the separation part of the novel. I'll give it a 8 out of 10. It's admirable that for once two characters are being adults and responsible about not running headfirst into a relationship after only 2 weeks. They have other responsibilities and passions they want to pursue that are more important, and it's realistic that they pick those things instead. Step 6. They don't really make up immediately in this novel. They meet up at a bookstore in New York and Charlie returns. It's implied that it's been a few months between their breakup, and the explanation for his return is really cute. Apparently, the man was so bummed out about the breakup with Nora and Sunshine Falls that even his family was like, dude, you're being such a buzzkill that maybe you should go back. And then he does. I think this ending is probably the most satisfying out of all of Henry's books. Also, a very public place to have your love confession, but maybe that's normal in New York. I wouldn't know. Like I said, I really did enjoy this novel, but I think Charlie and Nora were the weakest aspects for me. But after having read so many Emily Henry books, it's a personal preference thing. I think their dynamic as a couple just wasn't very interesting to me. But a lot of people loved it, so I'd say I'm in the minority here. Also, I hated Shepard. He really annoyed me. I need to talk about how much I hated Shepard. I need to get this anger out of my body somehow. Anytime there was a scene with Shepard, I was so tempted to fast forward through it, just a brick of tall cardboard with golden hair. He had to be aware of the implications of being with the woman cheating on your cousin, then doing the exact same thing with another girl that he's interested in. This novel gave him a real pass at the end, but I have no clue why. Funnily enough, though, the relationship that I ended up caring the most about was Nora and her sister. The romance was weirdly sidelined in my mind while I was reading this. This one is very unique from the novels we've talked about so far because there's an ensemble here. I'm aware the focus is mainly on Wynne and Harriet, but the other characters occupy the story quite heavily as well. The premise for this one was middle of the road for me, which is why it was the second to last book I read. This was the only book I didn't listen to the audio version of, so I didn't end up hearing Julia Whelan do her low guy voice for the guy characters. It's unfortunate because I actually didn't mind her voice, but I was happy to block it in my head. So Wynne and Harriet had broken up like a month ago, but they never told their friends about it, and as a result, when they all go on their annual vacation trip, they have to pretend to still be together due to some unforeseen circumstances. I think I just don't like it when people who don't like each other have to pretend to like each other. I think something about it rubs me the wrong way, especially when it's exes who already tried to make it work and failed. It's like, why are you forcing me to watch them forcing it? Fake dating has just never really appealed to me. I think it's because I've experienced seeing how weird arranged marriages are in real life, but to foreigners, the forced proximity of a relationship like that is exciting and fun. Though I don't have too much of a problem with that here, I think the reason I like this this one so much was because the structure wasn't entirely linear. I hadn't read You and Me on Vacation yet, so I thought it was really unique. In between them having this charade, we get flashbacks to them falling in love for the first time as well. It's like getting to read about people falling in love twice. It was sweet. This is one of the two novels where neither character is involved in publishing books, which I found funny. For once, we have a nurse and a carpenter, which was like, just thank goodness we had something different for once. It was refreshing. I really liked Win too. He's probably the most unique of all Henry's male leads. He's this golden retriever kind of dude. I think I was just grateful to read about this uncomplicated country himbo after reading about 3 literature-obsessed, trauma-ridden bad boys in a row. He's like Shepard done right, and a good 9 out of 10 for me. I just loved him. I feel like I've seen this kind of guy so often in high school and uni. They're a staple in any friend group, I think. I also love that he had depression. Wait, that sounded bad. Harriet had noticed that Win had changed a lot since they broke up and seemed happier, and it turns out it was because he had been taking medication for his depression, and it's helped him, which I thought was so nice. I feel so often male leads' mental health gets sidelined in favor of the female leads, but in this one there was clearly very careful consideration into making Win a fully developed person apart from Harriet. I felt more connected to the male lead than I did the female lead, which is very rare in romance media. I also felt bad for Win because he talks about how he feels like people get bored of him after they learn more about him, which is an insecurity I also don't see very often. Except maybe like cliched jock boys in high school movies, but it was refreshing. I think Win and Harriet have my favorite chemistry, which is unfortunate because so much of the beginning of this novel is them being either ambivalent to each other or absolutely hating being around each other. Miscommunication is absolutely this novel's greatest crime. It gets quite tiring by the end. Anyway, the formula. Step 1. Harriet seems like she's in a very great spot at the beginning, coming on this vacation with her friends at this house where they've spent time together each year, but now she has to be around her ex-fiancé and pretend like things are good between them for the sake of keeping the peace in their friend group. Not too bad. I'd say it's a bit worse than Nora Stevens' situation, but not terrible. Step Dukes. Their first kiss in this book is actually a flashback to the first time they ever kissed under the stairs, and I thought it was adorable and well done. Step Twas. This step is punctuated with a lot of misunderstandings and awkwardness. It never seems like they're ever really ready to consider being together again. It's a slow progression and the events made sense. I just think the undercurrent of how complicated it was made it not as fun to read. This one felt more enemies to lovers than book lovers, which surprised me. They were constantly annoying each other because of their refusal to communicate. Step Quarter. This just happened in their bedroom, which they shared. It's whatever. The only annoying thing is that by the end of the novel, both of them are constantly like, we're ready to let each other go. We're so ready to let go now while they're sleeping in the same bed. And it's like, yeah, sure guys, you definitely are. Step Sync. Win doesn't really lead the story, but he's written out for a little bit because the main 3 girls get into an argument about their futures. I think this is the best explanation for taking a backseat for a while. The separation is short-lived because Harriet decides that her and Win are a short-term thing and leaves to the airport like the next day after they woke up together. It's the classic letting go of someone you love so they can have a better life. I hate this trope with a passion unless it's done right, but it still happened and I don't have to like it. Step 6. This novel has an airport chase scene. As soon as I read the airport chase scene, I was so sad that I was robbed of that at Book Lovers. That's like the quintessential rom-com movie trope. I can't believe it passed unacknowledged in Book Lovers. The airport chase scene is played very straight though. Harry almost boards the plane and turns around to talk to Win again, Ross and Rachel style. It was cute, I guess. I don't know. The reason for a separation was so instantaneous that it's like, oh, you changed your mind? Okay, great. I think it would have had better impact if you just stayed with Win and talked it out by a beach or something. I think you can probably tell I wasn't particularly as engaged with the story of this one, and that's because there were just so many characters to get used to. There's Kimmy, Cleo, Parth, Sabrina, Win, and Harriet. I like their dynamic, but they definitely needed more time and backstory. Seeing so many characters in a romance drama was nice though. It gave the vibe of a sitcom. I just think Harriet and Win got so messy and complicated in the middle part that it was hard to keep up with them, and I missed out on them properly enjoying their time together. The flashbacks were the most fun part, where we got to see their friend group evolve. All the side relationships in this one were really sweet and made the world feel a lot bigger outside of Harriet and Win, which is very rare in these novels. I liked it. So when I was making this video, I was aware another book of hers was releasing soon, but I was determined not to read it because I'm an insane completionist and wanted to finish her other ones first. But when I read the summary for this, I immediately changed my mind. So our protagonist Daphne is currently living with her roommate Miles, but the situation of how they became roommates is quite abnormal. See, Daphne was actually engaged months prior to some guy. I actually forgot his name, and I don't want to search it up, let's just call him Chad. She was super in love with him, they were ready to get married, they bought a home, had a tight circle of friends and everything. And on the night of his bachelor party, he comes home and confesses that he cheated on Daphne with his best friend from high school. And while Daphne is desperate to patch things up anyway, Chad says that he's realized that he's actually not in love with her anymore, but with this best friend he cheated on her with, and breaks up the wedding on the spot and kicks Daphne out of their house. Sorry, just Just like saying all of it out loud is absurdly depressing. So, why is it abnormal that she's living with Miles now? Well, the reason is because the woman that Chad cheated on Daphne with, Petra, was also dating someone, and that someone was Miles. And apparently, Miles heard about Daphne getting kicked out, asks if she'd be his roommate until his lease ends since Petra moved out, and is living in Daphne's old house with Chad. So, it's so much. I just love it. Whenever I describe this plot to people, for some reason they can't understand how insane it is. Like, how can you not want to read the drama of that immediately? Just the awkwardness of living with someone whose partner cheated on them with your partner who also cheated on you. I would like a really bad TV show based on this premise alone, and I want to be the only person who makes it past the 10th season. I really did love this book all throughout, but I think it also exposes one of my main criticisms that sometimes happens with Emily Henry books, and that's when I think the guy becomes too much of a savior for the female lead in lieu of the male lead being a realistic person with their own problems unrelated to her. Miles, for example, is in the exact same shitty situation that Daphne is in, but gets over it so insanely quickly that it seems unrealistic. I understand that she got the worst deal out of both of them, considering she got kicked out of her own house and also was set to get married, but it was weird how willing Miles was to just revert to happy guy after all of this drama, especially when he still had pictures of his ex in his room. There's a really sweet moment at the beginning of this novel where he's very desperate for company because he's lonely and misses his ex, so he constantly asks her to watch a movie or hang out, and Daphne always says no because it's a weird situation, and she's trying not to think about the fact that this guy's ex-girlfriend basically stole her future. Eventually she caves and they smoke a joint together. They both just kind of wallow in their sadness for a bit, and it's nice. There's something really sad but hopeful about their conversation. It's a well-written scene. Then basically the next day, Miles just becomes a new man. All his sadness is just gone, no drama, and starts acting like an emotionally healthy roommate with no issues. It's so jarring. I know the entire point of his character is that he's too obsessed with being responsible for other people's happiness, and that's why he too often pretends to be okay, but I just wish he was sad for a bit longer. Weirdly sadistic thing for me to say, I know. I think Miles is a good 9 out of 10 for me. He's a lot more sociable than other male leads, the kind of guy who's very charismatic and everyone gravitates towards him, but also very average Joe, very down to earth. I feel like these guys go so under the radar in romance novels. Most of the time, these types of male leads end up being resenting best friend nice guys in movies. I think my favorite thing about this novel is how cozy it felt. Their apartment was so small and insular but cozy. There's something very sitcom-y with how other characters would come and hang out at the apartment. Everyone would cycle through like celebrity cameos. There was Miles' little sister who was so cute. I really liked her. There was Daphne's dad and his girlfriend Starfire. They were great. I really liked Starfire. She's like this weird new age lady. I wish we had more time with her, to be honest. She was really funny. There was also Daphne's friend Ashley, who I think is a bit older than her. I think the characters were just very memorable in this one. All their personalities were really distinct. The side characters here were more memorable than the ensemble in Happy Place, strangely enough. The climax of this novel was also a readathon for the library Daphne works at, which is such a low-stakes climax, even for a rom-com, but I enjoyed myself. Daphne's emceeing the whole thing and burst into tears in front of her staff because of how long she worked on it for the book. It was just funny thinking of this from the perspective of some teen volunteer who was listening awkwardly, not knowing why his new boss was crying over a readathon. So, let's move on to the formula. Step 1. Daphne, I think, is in the worst situation compared to every other Emily Henry protagonist. It's just so unbelievably miserable. At the beginning of the novel, she's lost her future, her fiancé, her circle of friends. The only thing she has is her mother, who she moved away from to be with her now ex-fiancé. The only thing that could have made her situation even worse was if a meteor fell from the sky and set fire to her and Miles' apartment. Step 2. Since this story features fake dating, wait, I think I completely forgot to mention that actually, I was so lost in all the other details. Miles and Daphne fake date for a little just to screw over their exes, but it's just a childish revenge thing. I don't think either of them actually are interested in getting back with them romantically. Anyway, their first kiss is in front of Chad to show how they're definitely in love, and they keep kissing even after Chad leaves. Like, didn't say bye or anything, or even see where he went. I don't know. I thought it was pretty lame, to be honest. Just painfully awkward to read. Step 2. This part is actually really cute. Miles is just really enthusiastic about anything Daphne is doing. It's adorable. He goes to see her working, shows her around town. He takes her to fun events and stuff. They go from awkwardly shimmying past each other in the apartment to cooking dinner and eating together and watching TV. The progression was really nice. I do have one gripe, and that is that the whole reason Miles acts as a tour guide and takes her out is because he wants her to stay staying in town, and he assumes that she loves it, even though she doesn't know if she does. And I think she should have figured that out beforehand. I thought it was arrogant of him to assume what she wanted for the future. Step Quattro. Their first sex scene was like the most normal one out of all of the novels, and honestly, any romance in any media I've ever seen. They hung out for a day, went home, and that's it. Simple, succinct. The scene is described, but it still feels like it had a tasteful fade to black. Step Sync. So, I have a lot to say about this. I know I've said that Miles is my favorite, but man, some of the things he does really annoy me, and this is probably the worst thing. So one day, when Daphne is waiting for him in the parking lot after her shift at the library, Miles just doesn't show up, basically stands her up. This is also after they're fully dating, completely in love too. And he doesn't just stand her up, he also full disappears for I think a few weeks. He doesn't come home, he doesn't text her or call her back, he just is a ghost. He's full on gone. I was really surprised because I just couldn't think of a single conceivable reason why Daphne would take him back after pulling something like this. The crazy thing is, his apology is a box of fudge, which I know the novel Daphne and Miles condemn as having been really stupid and tasteless, but it still happened and it was hard to overlook it. Eventually, because the novel has to end, he returns. And why, you ask? Well, because he was helping his ex Petra move, since Petra and Chad broke up. But then it turns out he realized how dumb that was and how weird that would look to Daphne since he didn't tell her. And the real reason he left was because he was getting Daphne's father to come back to see her again after he left abruptly as a surprise for her. But Daphne hates surprises, so this was also stupid. And also, why not give a better explanation instead of fudge? I think this is the worst reason for him to disappear from the plot. Just the absolute worst one. You won't find a worse one in any of the other novels. 1 out of 10, and I'm only giving a 1 because at least there was an apology gift there. Step 6. They make up from this somehow. Daphne forgives him because Lord knows why. Also, she moves out of his house because she thinks she's being too reliant on him emotionally, which honestly, I don't think she was. I thought she was just a lot in love. I don't know. It's normal to be that excited at the start of a new relationship. But then they start living together again a lot later. It's solid, just that fudge ruined everything about this being a good ending. I can imagine that couple will never look at that tasty treat the same way again. I know I sound really mad, but I did actually enjoy this novel. I think I just really liked Daphne. She's really cute and reserved, but also a complete mess. Her friendship with Ashley was very sweet as well. I was really happy for both of them by the end. Just, man, that box of fudge. Can you imagine standing up your girlfriend and basically ghosting her for a good 2 weeks without explanation, and you decide the best way to make it up to her is by placing a box of fudge as a wrapped present and leave it in your dining room table? And it's not even just that you brought her fudge, but you also wrapped it as if it would be a really cool surprise that she'd love or something. Ignoring the fact that it's also the size of a wedding ring box. Just, you have to be so ungodly dumb. So undeniably, Beach Read is, in my opinion, the best Emily Henry romance you will probably read. It was pretty close between Beach Read and Funny Story, but I think Beach Read's overall vibe was probably the best. I was having a good time throughout, just really chilling. The premise for this novel is that two writers swap genres for I think half a year since they're both in a slum. It's set by a beach where both of them have these giant beach houses as well. In line with the formula, our protagonist January is not in a good place. The reason she's at this beach house is because her father, who owned it, died. And apparently this was the house that he was having his affair in. So January, who wasn't able to find another place to live, has to settle down here and write her happy romance novel and try not to think about all the times her father left their family to cheat on her mother with his mistress. Which is just a brutal premise for a rom-com. It's a lot to get into at the beginning of the book. I think the reason this stands out as the best is because January just immediately has a lot going for her as a character. She used to be very sunny and extroverted, but after her father's death, she became very sullen and in a funk. She's supposed to be getting chapters done for her editor, but she just can't write no matter what she does, considering the circumstances. And she also has to clean out her father's house, literally having to scrape through her trauma. She also keeps running into her father's mistress in town, which is so awkward because she keeps trying to make a connection with her. I hated Sonia so much. She was so annoying. I feel like as a mistress, after doing all that damage, just leave the family alone. Don't even try to patch up anything. You've done more than enough. You shouldn't be involved with them in any sense after that unless they request it. I remember getting really hooked while reading this, and I think it was purely because of how garbage January's situation was. There was something really comforting about the thought that it would get better for her later and she'll make it through. Also, I really like the male lead. I think he's a solid 8 out of 10. Honestly, all of Henry's male leads are really sweet and stable, comparatively better to other romance novels I've read. I thought Gus was sweet, if not a bit broody. He was a real Mr. Darcy type character, but like more modern hipster Darcy with tattoos. Their relationship starts off very Pride and Prejudice-y, where January assumes Gus is a pretentious literary nerd who looks down on her sappy romance novels, but turns out he actually has read her books and respects her as an author equal to him. Also, I love that they wrote and showed notes to each other because their windows were across from each other. I thought that was cute. Another thing is, I don't know if it was just me, but when I was reading this one, Gus just had such short king energy. I don't know how to explain it. I don't think his height is mentioned a single time, but he just radiated such short king energy. I hope the movie adaptation canonizes this because that's how I constantly saw him. I kept picturing January having about 10 to 30 centimeters on him. Beach Read probably has the best chemistry too. I don't know if it's first reading bias or something, but there was something very first love about their romance. They're such giddy teenagers whenever they were flirting. I think the general consensus is that this book is well written, but most people find it a bit cheesy and too dramatic, and that's fair. At one point, the couple has sex at an abandoned, burned down cult compound during a raging storm, and it's meant to be dramatic and intense and romantic, but all I could think about was the fact that they were having sex in a cult compound. It's kind of hard to not think that. If you're wondering why there's a burned down cult compound in a beach romance, I'm the wrong person to ask. Actually, I'm the right person to ask, it's just a lot to explain. This one is definitely less light, but I think that's why I liked it a lot more. Both the characters feel very developed in their own way. It was interesting to read about Gus's depression and the fact he was married once and got cheated on. Usually with male leads, their trauma is familial, so it was refreshing to read something that wasn't mommy issues and daddy issues for once. This is also the only Emily Henry novel where I was close to crying. I'm saying close to crying because I was listening to this on my tram home and I wasn't in the mood to explain to a stranger why I was crying. The thing is, I didn't even cry because of the main couple. I was crying when January read her dad's letters to her. The letters are an important plot point because she'd been in limbo about reading them ever since she arrived at the beach house, but she didn't want to because her dad, cheated on her mother. When she finally read them, it turns out he's been writing her letters for almost every birthday, and they were so sweet and sad, and I know her father wasn't a sympathetic character, or even a good person, but that really got me for some reason. Still, the formula. Step 1. I already said that January is in the worst place in the beginning of the novel, but it's not like the worst. I think for how bad it is, I'd say she probably had the second worst situation in all of Emily Henry's novels. Like, it sucks having to live there after losing your father, but it's a beach house. And it comes with a hot neighbor, so it evens out pretty well. Step Dukes. Their first kiss is also cute. It's when they're at a drive-thru, or a drive-in. I think it's a drive-in movie. That's what it's called, right? They start making out and get caught by one of the security guards, so they leave. Again, very American. Step Twas. I was just having a chill roller coaster ride here without too many ups and downs. All of the novel practicing events that January suggests are so unbelievably different to Gus's, though. To explain, while they're swapping genres, they also, practice each other's genres with little events that they create for each other. January's were all normal cute dates and Gus's were these depressing interviews with ex-cult members. A real intense tone shift, undeniably. Step Quattro. Their first sex scene is when they're in January's dad's beach house basement after she's looking through her dad's stuff, which is just an emotional whiplash of a scene. I'll give it that. I think the tone shifts are just so jarring in this one, which a lot of people found obnoxious. In all honesty, I don't mind it too much though. Step Sync. I think this is, however, one of the worst male lead exits, only defeated by the box of fudge. The reason Gus leaves January is because his ex comes back to town to talk to him, and January freaks out thinking they might get back together. And then he just disappears from the story. His car's not in his driveway anymore, he doesn't text her again, he's just fully gone. He pulled a Miles, basically, and a lot later he reappears. So I'll be really honest, I completely forgot what his explanation was that led them to making up, but he did some big romantic gesture where it was raining and she was all in, so good for them, I guess. I suppose in the end, the way into a woman's heart is abandoning her for weeks, then randomly showing up again with an intense confession of love. I'll rank this as a solid 3 out of 10 because the fact I don't remember his explanation probably means it wasn't a very good one. Sorry, Gus. Step 6. So, not much else to say here. They're basically living together at his place from that point onward. Also, there's an epilogue where they get married and have a kid, so that's cool. However, I have a really important gripe with this book, and I truly believe it's this novel's greatest sin, and that is that Gus never writes a fun romance novel. The whole point of the book is that these writers swap genres, and while January writes this interesting character drama, Gus writes this depressing ass story about lovers in a cult who are running away from a meteor, and it's like, thought you said cute romances are easy to write. Guess they weren't, huh? It's also a real meteor, by the way, which is probably giving you more questions that I'm not willing to answer. I just really wanted to see Gus write a cliche and bland romance novel, like just a pure slice of life. But I didn't get it, and I'm disappointed. Just the thought of a serious and intense literature guy who reads Dostoevsky writing a simple small town romance was so funny to me, and I was let down. The exceptions. So Emily Henry's first books were not like the ones we talked about just now. She also wrote some novels on the side that were a bit more loosey-goosey. These don't have adults as the leads, they were targeted at a younger demographic, and usually had supernatural elements. And most of them are also unreadable. You have no idea how much of a slog these were to get through. I dropped them several times while working on this video, but I really wanted to stay true to the title. I know most people likely don't care about these books as much as the ones we just talked about, but maybe you read them at some point in your existence and would like to feel validated. So, you're welcome. Alright, let's go through these together. The Love That Split the World. This is Emily Henry's debut novel, and I can safely say this one had the worst fall off towards the second half. This one is about a high schooler named Natalie Cleary who's suddenly able to access this other dimension that is exactly the same as hers, with the only difference being it has a guy who doesn't exist in her world. And when I started reading it, I found it really engaging. I really liked Natalie, I liked learning about her family, I was interested in all this supernatural stuff happening around her, including this weird ghostly grandma figure who she talks to every night, and how she was adopted into a white family as a Native American. I loved it, you know? A woman of color novel? I was having a great time. The thing is, the guy who doesn't exist in her world, but this other world, was the mystery I was more interested in. Because there's something so fascinating about a person who only you can see, and no one else in your life can. And that person finally feeling like they were noticed as well. Like, that's super interesting, right? So, I have a certain qualm about certain supernatural romance stories. And what I mean is, the ones where it's very obvious that the author has no interest in the supernatural aspect of it. Because when the author has no interest in it, it very often bleeds into the protagonist, who equally has no interest in it. And as a result, we have Natalie, who is literally capable of accessing two universes, talking to an academic who is the only one who believes that she can do this. A bunch of supernatural stuff happening around her, including an apparent impending apocalypse that threatens the world, and the rest of the story is just her being insanely bored of her ability. It is actually unbearable how much the romance takes from this story, because every character linked specifically with this impending doom and mystery are so ungodly uninterested in it. Natalie doesn't care about it, and most she's worried about it. Beau, who's the male lead by the way, is equally uninterested and just kind of does whatever Natalie tells him to. And Alice, the only character who cares and is invested in the mystery, is not someone Natalie likes very much. This novel has so many scenes where Alice and Natalie are talking about what they should do, or they go into Natalie's old memories to find out what's happening, and the session ends with Alice mad at Natalie and no new information, and it's like, great. What are we doing here then? Also, I hate Beau. He annoys me. He's the worst parts of Win and Alex mushed together. Thing is, he doesn't even do anything that's sacrilegious or bad throughout the novel. He's a very passive character, but I still really don't like him, and I don't know why. I might like him less than Alex, actually. I'd give him a 2 out of 10. There's also a really big twist at the end of the novel related to the night ghost grandma I mentioned, but it's not really a very fun twist. It's a twist that makes you go, oh, I guess that works, and is strangely forgettable. One final thing, there's a character called Matt Kincaid in this novel who is Natalie's ex-boyfriend, who physically assaults her when she refuses to kiss him. But then a huge chunk of the middle of the novel is dedicated to how after that incident, he got in a car crash or something, and it's about the two parallel universes, and all the characters are really worried about if he's okay or not. Natalie even cries about it, and I'm sorry, but the novel wanting me to feel sorry for a guy who actually pushed Natalie up against a car was just so painful to get through. I hate all these second male leads. They're always so bad in these novels. I don't care about Matt Kincaid. I could have gone my entire existence without ever having to think about this fictional character and wasting my thoughts on him. Saying A Million Junes was infinitely better than The Love That Split the World would be an understatement. This one made me emotional, especially towards the end. This time it was also because of the protagonist's relationship to her dad. The parental relationships in Henry novels are always really heartfelt and interesting. The supernatural element and the romance in this one aren't at odds with each other. They're in fact enmeshed and complement each other really well. This is a Romeo and Juliet type love story where the main obstacle between the two leads is that their families, the Engerts and the O'Donnells, have been feuding intensely for decades. Also, I understand American rural towns have weird names, but Five fingers is just beyond my suspension of disbelief. Like, seriously? When I started listening to this one, I kept getting confused because I thought they were referring to some American fast food franchise I didn't know about. And then the more they mentioned it, I was just sitting there like, a lot of people are really emotionally invested in this restaurant, huh? That is to say, I'm an idiot, but thankfully I figured it out quickly a bit later. It's just funny because the characters are like, man, Five Fingers is great, but I don't know if I want to stay here or go out to college. And I was like, I'm sure there are restaurants like Five Fingers in other parts of the country. I actually liked the male lead in this one. I liked Saul. The problem with Saul is I already read about Gus, and they are essentially the same character, except Saul is a bit younger. I didn't mind him though. Despite being high schoolers, these kids felt like fake high schoolers. Like, when they're in emotional scenes, they have a sudden adult maturity. A lot of the talk between the high schoolers feels like how an adult thinks teenagers talk, and it came off as a bit weird. I think this novel would have been a lot more cohesive if it was just set in university. It would have made it a lot better. Also, I have to mention this. There's a scene with a gay character talking to June, and it feels very forced and awkward because they talk about the difficulties of being gay, and it made me remember that out of nowhere scene in Kissing Booth 3 where they shoehorned in a gay character out of nowhere as if to hit a diversity quota. It was really stupid. But apologies if that scene as a gay person impacted you in some emotional or meaningful way, but it was dumb in my opinion. Anyway, when Emily Henry writes about loss and familial relationships, it's really great and rich in character drama. Every scene where June talks to her mother was beautiful, as well as her flashbacks to her father. I like that it delved into Saul's backstory with his sister and the generational backstory of both of their families. I would really like it if this got adapted into something as well. The story was quite well written and felt pretty whole by the end. So I like the teacher character in this one. She reminded me of Alice, but she had a very authoritative aura about her that I enjoyed. There's clearly a lot of interest Emily Henry has in the technical aspects of storytelling and books, and whenever it's a plot involving writing, it definitely comes through, and I like hearing her perspective through the characters. There's not much else to say here. This novel is probably her best one in general. If you're not interested in the slice of life rom-coms in the main section, you'll enjoy this one for its supernatural elements and interesting character drama. When the Sky Fell in Splendor. This one is really hard to explain, I'll be honest. I think this novel is what happens when a romance author is forced to write a Stranger Things novel with a deadline. But apparently this is Henry's favorite book she's written, so I have no idea how this came to be. This story is about a group of kids who call themselves The Ordinary, and they run a YouTube channel where they find supernatural happenings in their remote town of Splendour. At the beginning of the novel, some extraterrestrial explosion happens that gives most of them superpowers, including our protagonist Fran, who now has the ability to control electricity. And you would be thinking, wow, that's so interesting. How unique and refreshing after hearing the same plot 7 different times, but no. You have no idea. This book is so all over the place that it legitimately took me months to get around to finishing it. This book was the reason I couldn't release this video earlier. I was procrastinating so hard on finishing it. There aren't really any character arcs in this book or things the kids learn. A lot of bad stuff happens to them since they're running from the FBI and this creepy old man called Wayne Hastings who they believe is building a weapon to destroy the Earth or something. But like, nothing is really cohesive or makes sense. The end of the novel is very exciting because there's a lot of thrilling chase scenes as they run from the FBI and cops and strangers on the internet, but it's all very ungrounded and random. The ending twist is also really stupid because it turns out that these powers aren't because of aliens, it's because they were all possessing this girl that died called Molly, who's the daughter of Wayne Hastings, who's actually a good guy. Why this would give them powers? I don't know, man. I don't think even the book knows. All the character drama and stuff is done really well, obviously, and it's interesting because it stands out so starkly compared to the terrible story and action. Henry's main talent in writing lies with character and relationship stuff. I have no idea why she wrote this. I'm actually quite curious, to be honest. Especially in relation to the main character's older brother, Mark, who's in a coma, who's written with a lot of love and care. I love the ending paragraph of this novel so much because there's so much you can tell about this character, and he didn't say a single line of dialogue throughout the entire novel. It was great. I think I'll remember that final line for a while. There's also a lot of interesting tidbits about black hole and space and stuff. I don't know if Henry has an interest in astrophysics or if she just did a lot of research, but it was pretty interesting. I enjoyed those bits. Another important thing to mention is that there is a cow stampede. And in my notes, I just wrote cow stampede with no additional information. So I guess Post Crisp wanted you to know that yes, there is a cow stampede and it was funny. I like that the cows beat up some serious FBI guys. This book also contains the worst character in any Henry novel I've ever read, and his name is Arthur. He sucks, he's terrible, and I'm grateful that I'll never have to read another line of his dialogue ever again. There was a point where the characters were worried he would die, or get hurt, and I was praying to God that either would happen to him. I think he was coded as autistic, but if he was, that definitely did not justify anything he said and did. I'm giving no further explanation. I truly hate this character. So, inevitably, the popularity of these novels has led to talks of adaptations from big league executives. There's a bunch of studios who already have their hands on all of them, basically. I think I'm most excited for Funny Story. I just really like the dynamic of the two leads in that. I hope they don't ruin it. You and Me on Vacation seems to have their cast ready, as well as their screenplay by Yulin Kwong. It's the most ahead in its production. It's already got everything ready to film. I don't know how this one's gonna go, but I guess it'll be interesting. Hopefully it's better than the novel. I'll see it when I see it, I guess. Beach Read hasn't got a cost yet, but I think it's going to release in cinemas instead of Netflix, so that's fun. It is the most popular Emily Henry novel. I'm really hoping for a short Gus. I have no other interest in this adaptation. I am curious, however, on how they're going to handle the cult compound sex scene. I hope they play it straight and it comes out looking as weird as it was to read. Book Lovers seems like it's in its early stages. There's next to no news about it right now, other than the script is being written. It did come out like 2 years ago, so that makes sense. Same with Funny Story, which is apparently going to have Emily Henry herself write it. I honestly would have preferred a different writer tackling that story, but who knows, maybe it'll be good. So if you're wondering why I haven't mentioned Happy Place yet, that's because it's not going to get a movie adaptation. For some god knows why reason, I guess, it's getting a TV show. I guess it makes sense considering there is an ensemble here, but I have no idea how they're going to pull this off. There's definitely not enough content in the book to cover a whole TV show, unless you're going to really stretch the flashbacks or it's a miniseries. I think I'm most interested in how this will turn out because I get the feeling that whoever's going to run this show is probably going to take a lot of creative liberties. Final thoughts. So, after reading all of these, I actually don't know what my ultimate consensus is. I guess I basically did a review and ranking. So, review wise, should you read Emily Henry books? Well, if you have an interest in romance, I definitely recommend them. They're easy to get through, the drama is well written, and there is some philosophy thrown in too. The characters are pretty likable and pleasant to read about, and if you're into literature, guys, there's a lot of them here. I'd say that there's definitely an issue with diversity in her books. Women of color are often written a bit weirdly. They're usually scorned exes or cheaters, with the exception of Swapna from You and Me on Vacation, and I think one of the side characters in Happy Place, as well as the love that split the world, of course. Also, men of color seemingly don't exist here, and neither do LGBTQ plus people. If they are there, they're usually just background decoration and aren't allowed to overtake a scene in any significant way. This is a general problem with romance media, though, and that would need its own separate video. I think from people I've talked to about Emily Henry books, she's in this weird spot where her writing is between cringy and heartfelt. Like, they enjoy the emotional and sappy moments, but can't really stand the millennial style banter. I feel when book nerds read books that reference current pop culture or write in a Joss Whedon style, it's immediately void of substance to them, which I do get, but also don't. Like, don't get me wrong, hearing references to like Brat Summer or popular celebrities in drama is annoying, but it's also not that weird. Sitcoms, for example, did the same thing, but they're not considered cringy because of it. Same with movies and the like. References are fun, you know? It can be thrilling to see something you recognize in the show. I don't think it should really degrade your experience with a book in any significant way. If you can look past it, I think you can actually find a lot of interesting stuff in Emily Henry's books and contemporary romance in general. So, that's it. She's just a writer whose works are pretty fun for me, and I have enjoyed this past year. I think her writing is unique and interesting compared to other romances I've read. There's always a really interesting exploration of themes or further characterization that really shows how much she understands her characters and world. I think they're starting to feel less like wish-fulfillment fantasies now, which is nice and rare in female-focused romance media. Also, I'm not making a review of the next one she's making. Maybe I'll put it on my Patreon, depending on how well this video does. But in all honesty, I think I'm a little burnt out on Emily Henry right now. Thanks for being here. Follow me on Patreon. I'll see you later. I'm gonna chill out for the rest of February. Bye!
I keep you all the time in my dreams. You want me.